Maintaining a family requires more than financial resources. It demands courage, sacrifice, and, above all, purpose. Today, we will explore what it truly means to pay the price to build and sustain a family that reflects God's values. Get ready for a transformative reflection that could change your life. Let's look at a powerful biblical passage where Jesus, though not speaking directly about family, touches on something profound: the cost of following Him and being His servant. This principle can be applied to marriage and family life. So, let's dive into Luke chapter 14, verses 25 to 34. Here's what the text says. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, He said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple." Pause for a moment here. Let's focus on verse 26. Jesus is saying that following Him requires a willingness to pay a price. This price involves facing challenges with family, with oneself, and with human temptations that often go against God's will. Now, look at verse 27. "And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." Notice how Jesus makes it clear that being His disciple is not an easy or cost-free choice. There's a price to be paid. Jesus then provides examples to explain this principle. Verses 28 to 30. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, "This person began to build and wasn't able to finish." Now consider another example. Verses 31 to 32. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation, while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. The central point here is this: before starting anything, understand the cost you will need to pay. Jesus concludes in verse 33, "In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples." And he ends with a powerful reflection in verse 34. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. It is thrown out. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. Jesus teaches us that everything has a price. Nothing comes for free. Perhaps the price isn't measured in money or material possessions, but in dedication, sacrifice, and effort. Jesus uses the examples of building a tower and going to war to illustrate the need for planning and preparation to face adversity. The same applies to family life. Sustaining a marriage requires effort and sacrifice. Raising a family demands daily dedication and selflessness. Maintaining harmony at home may require letting go of old habits and even confronting our own selfishness. So, I ask you, are you willing to pay the price for your family? Remember, everything has a price. Not everything is paid for with money. Favor cannot be repaid with money. Favor is repaid with favor. Sometimes you'll have to pay with tolerance. At other times, the price will be silence. And there are moments when payment means doing something you don't even want to do. These too are ways to pay the price. That's why it's essential to understand that at some point you will have to pay, or you'll face serious problems. So, my question to you is, do you know the cost of maintaining a family? That's what I want to reflect on with you now. What does it cost to build a family? The first thing it will cost is this: you'll need to be fearless and bold. Starting a family requires the courage of someone willing to face their fears. And here comes the big question. Are you certain it will work? The answer is no, you're not. No one can guarantee everything will work out. You can't even give that assurance to yourself. Imagine then, when we talk about two people uniting their lives. Anyone who wants to get married must overcome fear and insecurity. Those who can't overcome these feelings often hide behind a phrase that, while understandable, isn't aligned with what God thinks. Let's look at creation. When God created man, he made him alone. But soon after, he declared, "It is not good for man to be alone." So, when someone says they prefer to remain alone, I understand. I respect their choice. But consider this: the Creator disagrees. It's true that the Apostle Paul gave advice about remaining single, but he also made it clear, "I say this, not the Lord." From God's perspective, marriage is of utmost importance, and today, it's not just about being fruitful and multiplying. After all, we already have over 8 billion people on the planet. We don't need more people. The world is already full. Even so, marriage remains important. Why? Because marriage is a choice that requires courage. And to make that choice, you need to 1. Overcome fear. 2. Rise above negative examples. Many people avoid marriage because they are stuck on the bad examples they've seen throughout their lives. Maybe you know someone who says, "Oh, Pastor, I'll never get married." Or perhaps you've heard things like, "With these rising electricity and gas bills, I wouldn't get married even if someone paid me." I get it. There are plenty of negative examples, and overcoming them has a cost. But if you want to build a family, stop focusing on the bad examples. It's true that many marriages, especially those without Christ at the center, end up failing. If you ask someone, "If you could go back in time, would you marry the same person?" Many would respond, "No, not with the same person. I've learned my lesson." But understand this: overcoming negative examples is worth the price. And do you know what's curious? Sometimes when we're evangelizing, people open their hearts and say, "Pastor, can I be honest? I'm here at church to learn, but marriage, no, that's not for me." Now tell me, why do you insist on using so-and-so as your reference for avoiding marriage or building a family? Who gave you that standard? Let me tell you, it was you. But you know what else is out there? Good people. I look at couples who have been married for 35 years and think, that's an achievement. 35 years loving the same person, facing life's challenges together. Do you know what I think? That guy deserves a membership card for being a professional in persistence. But joking aside, here's my proposal. Let me show you that marriage and family are not failed institutions. The other day, I was talking about this and someone said to me, "Oh, Pastor, wake up. What world are you living in?" Because in my world, everyone's having conflicts and getting divorced. And I replied, "Then change your world, my friend. Because in my world, people are building incredible stories, finding happiness, overcoming challenges, and creating beautiful families. Come into my world." The person looked at me, confused. Honestly, I don't think they understood anything. They may have even given up. Now, here's another important thing about marriage. If you're going to enter a relationship, forget the idea of bringing an escape route with you. Marriage doesn't come with an escape route or emergency exit. The only exit door for marriage is the one that leads downward. You know what I mean? It's about 4 feet wide, 6.5 feet long, and about 5 feet deep. You leave lying down to rest in peace. I'm serious. You might think it's funny, but this is a very serious matter. Yes, building a family costs. It takes boldness. You need to understand your role. Yes, your role within the family, whether in the short term, the medium term, or the long term. If you're a husband, be a husband. Don't try to be the wife. The husband has the role of a husband, and one of those roles is to carry the challenges of being a husband. Now, for the wives, be a wife. You are strong, you are amazing, but please don't try to be the husband. Each person has their function within the family. The problem today is that people get mixed up about their roles. And you know who else needs to understand their role? The mother-in-law. Oh yes, the mother-in-law has a very important role. Do you know what it is? The oracle of wisdom. The mother-in-law is someone who, through life experience, has matured, raised her children, and now occupies the role of a quiet counselor. That's right. The oracle stays in its position of wisdom and only responds to inquiries when consulted. Now, some forget this and want to be the boss of the house. The other day, I heard a story like that. This guy got married and the next morning, His mother-in-law was there at the breakfast table, as if nothing had changed. And he came to me and asked, "Pastor, what would you do?" I replied, I'd say, "Ma'am, come sit with us and enjoy breakfast. I'm going to narrate in detail everything that happened with your daughter last night." That would settle it. Jokes aside, the truth is that understanding your role comes at a cost. If you're part of a family, ask yourself, who am I? Within a family, you need to know exactly who you are. If you're the spouse, understand your role, your responsibilities, and your purpose. If you're the husband, act like a husband. If you're the wife, embrace your position as a wife. And in larger families, the roles multiply. Maybe you're no longer just a husband or a wife. Now you're a father-in-law or mother-in-law. And do you know what that means? It means there are boundaries. Let me share something that happened to me. One day, my son called me in a panic because my grandson wouldn't stop crying. He was little, and no one knew what was wrong. My wife and I rushed over to help. When we arrived, there was my daughter-in-law holding my grandson in her arms. He was crying and screaming non-stop. I took that little boy in my arms and walked down the street, praying and asking God for him, but he kept crying. Then I had an impulse. I put him in the car, ready to take him to the doctor. But just as I was about to start the car, I remembered. That boy wasn't my son. He was my grandson. I had no right to take over his parents' role. I took a deep breath, called my son and daughter-in-law, handed the boy back to them, and followed them with my car, still praying. Let me tell you, I was so nervous I had to stop at the mall for a cup of coffee. The tension was overwhelming. That's why I say, there are boundaries. And it costs you something to know your place within a family. If you're a brother-in-law, be a brother-in-law. If you're a nephew, be a nephew. If you're a grandfather, understand that the role of a grandfather is to carry the weight of future generations. Yes, as a grandfather, you become the one your child trains for their child to ride on. It's an important role, but it's also full of challenges. And if you're a stepfather or stepmother, I want you to understand something. This role is for the strong. Being a parent is hard enough. Now, being a stepfather or stepmother requires near angelic wisdom. Do you know why? Because you'll organize the child's birthday party, pay for everything, and on the big day, the biological father, who didn't contribute a single cent, will show up. He'll hug the child you've helped raise and say, "So, kiddo, are you enjoying the party?" And maybe he'll even glance at your wife, his ex, and think, "Now she's well taken care of." Meanwhile, the child is whispering under their breath, "Get him, Dad. Get him, Dad." Do you see? These roles come at a price. If you're a stepchild, understand your role. If you're a father-in-law, brother-in-law, grandfather, or parent, each position comes with its challenges and costs. Now, if you don't understand this, you're not ready to start a family yet. As Jesus said, before building a tower, count the cost. The third thing, it costs. You need to know where you're going to live when you start your family. This, too, has a price. If you're going to live in a rental property, have you thought about what it means to pay rent every month? Who do you live with today? Because let me tell you, when I got married, I didn't even know what an electricity bill was. To me, electricity was just something that happened. It got dark, the lights came on, the refrigerator worked on its own. When I found out all of this came with a bill, it was a shock. So, where are you going to live? Logistics have a cost. If you don't evaluate things carefully, you might end up paying a high price. Maybe you already own your home. That's great. But what if that own home is in an improper place? And more, some people build a home in the backyard of someone else's property. Let me ask you, who told you that's yours? Before doing something like that, consult an attorney or seek advice. Because at the end of the day, the house might be yours, but the land isn't. Now let's look at another scenario. You're going to live in an inherited family home. At first, the idea seems great, but let me show you how this can turn into a challenge. Let's say a mother has a house, a well-kept one. Here's how it often works. One child got married to a responsible partner, built their own home. Another, also married, structured their life, and built their house. A third followed the same path. But then, one of the children decides to live in the mother's house. And in this situation, they think, well, since they all have their own homes, I'll live here. After all, this house belongs to all of us. But this creates conflicts. Someone always says, you don't need this house because you already have your own. And do you know who usually says this? The one who is comfortable and doesn't need anything. This mentality of, it belongs to all of us, often turns the family house into a kind of shared community. And when this happens, challenges arise. There's no privacy. The bedroom doesn't have an ensuite bathroom, and you have to calculate your every move. You can't make noise so you don't disturb anyone. Taking a shower at night becomes a strategic exercise to avoid the sound of water hitting the floor. And making love? Forget it. It feels like you're robbing a bank with all the tension. I'm not criticizing those who start this way. Let me make that clear. I started this way too. What I'm saying is that you need to understand the cost. If you don't know the price you'll have to pay, your marriage and family may not go very far. Now, let me share an important lesson with you. Do you want to build a family? Then learn to cut the umbilical cord. Look at what is written in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Before forming a new family, make sure you're capable of disconnecting. This includes both financial and emotional disconnection. And do you know what's even worse? Sometimes one person can cut the cord, but the other cannot. Let me share a situation I witnessed. A woman, a very successful attorney, had been married for over 20 years to another attorney who was equally successful. Unfortunately, they faced a marital crisis and ended up divorcing. After the separation, she moved back into her mother's house. Her mother was a widow living alone, but suddenly she had her daughter's company again. More than just company, the mother now also received a gift. The daughter brought with her considerable financial resources which helped support the household. Now, let me ask you, did this mother want her daughter to go back to her husband? Of course not. She looked at all the benefits she now had. Her daughter's presence. The financial resources her daughter contributed. The problem was that the daughter didn't fully understand this. She was the one who came to me for help because she didn't want to hurt her mother. The mother would speak terribly about her son-in-law, not because he was a bad man, but because she didn't want to lose her daughter's company and financial support. That's why we need to learn how to cut the umbilical cord and put everything in its proper place within the family. Oh, Pastor, but the Bible says, honor your father and mother. Yes, that's true. But when the Bible also says, a man shall leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, it's not talking about abandonment. What the word is teaching is about creating a healthy and secure distance. A space where your spouse can respect you and admire the stance you take after marriage. Your spouse below God and above everything else. Repeat after me. Your spouse below God. Is God above everything, yes or no? Yes. Look at what it says in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the text continues. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, pay attention. The commandment teaches us 1. Love God above all. 2. Love your neighbor as yourself. This means you shouldn't love someone else more than you love yourself. Why? Because when you do that, you put yourself in a vulnerable position where you could end up in an abusive relationship. When someone realizes you care about them more than you care about yourself, it can create space for problems. This applies to any relationship, whether with your spouse, your children, or anyone else. Let your child see that you love them more than yourself, and you'll notice how their behavior changes. In the past, our parents didn't ask, "Do you love me, child?" They simply assumed their role and told us what we needed to hear. In my case, it was my aunt who raised me, and she always said, "My son, I don't care if you like me. I just want you to respect me." And it worked. They raised us with firmness. Respect your elders. What belongs to others is theirs. Honor your family's name. And if we didn't learn, there were consequences. There was no room for disrespect, but all of this brought us to where we are today. Praise God. Now, back to marriage. Are you planning to get married? That's great. But you need to be clear about something. You must love yourself. Tell your spouse, I care deeply about you, but I care more about myself. And if they forget this, you have the responsibility to remind them. Because without this balance, things can fall apart. Set boundaries. The Bible teaches us, love your neighbor as yourself. This means the limit to how much you love someone else is the love you have for yourself. If you love someone more than you love yourself, you could end up in problematic situations. The only exception? God. Loving God comes above everyone and everything else. Beyond that, balance in love is essential if you want to go far. Now, let's look at what it says in Matthew chapter 19, verse 5. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Here, Jesus makes a clear statement. Marriage is not just a simple union. It's a fusion. If it were just a union, it would be easy to break. But in marriage, two people fuse together, like coffee and milk. Once mixed, there's no way to separate them again. Do you remember those couple retreats where they gave you two different colored pieces of clay to mix together? By the end, the resulting color was no longer just one or the other. It was a blend. That's fusion. And in marriage, this fusion comes at a cost. Your schedule doesn't always take priority. Your preferences don't always take priority. Your reasoning doesn't always prevail. Why? Because you're no longer alone. If you don't agree with this, then don't get married. But if you choose to marry, understand that marriage exposes you to this fusion, where decisions must be shared. Now, I want to speak directly to the men. That's it. Now pay close attention. If you're not married yet, listen carefully. The Bible commands you to love your wife. This isn't a suggestion, it's an obligation. Now, let me ask you, what is love? Love can't be summed up in a single word. Just like a cake isn't made from just one ingredient, love is the combination of several things. Let's simplify. A cake is made with flour, sugar, eggs, milk, butter, and baking powder. Love is also made up of many ingredients, and here's the weight you, as a man, need to carry. Loving means providing. Whether your wife is a great provider or not, provision is a responsibility God has placed on your shoulders. In addition, loving means protecting. If your wife is in danger, you must be the one standing on the front lines to defend her. Let me give you an example I recently came across. A couple was robbed, and the husband ran away, leaving his wife in harm's way. The thief, seeing this, felt pity and went back to help her. Do you know what this shows? Protecting is one of the greatest responsibilities a man has in marriage. Husband, protecting your wife is your duty. Let me share a story to illustrate. One day, I came home exhausted after a long and draining day. All I wanted was to park my car, take a shower, and collapse on the couch. But from a distance, I saw a pile of dirt right in front of my garage. My first thought was, if someone asked my wife to dig this hole, I'm about to start some trouble right now. I parked the car and walked over, my mind full of questions. When I got closer, I saw a man standing near the pile of dirt. But as I looked inside the hole, there was his wife, kneeling with a wrench and a small saw, fixing a pipe. At that moment, all I wanted to say was, "Is there a shortage of men here, ma'am?" But I stayed quiet, because honestly, what could I say? Men, it is your duty to protect and care for your wife. No one should yell at her, and no one should disrespect her. Let me share another story. One day I came home and found my wife crying. I asked her what had happened, and she told me that our son had yelled at her. I went straight to his room, opened the door, and said, "Listen, young man, I'm not your father right now. I'm the husband of the woman you yelled at." He looked confused and asked, "What?" And I replied, "That's right, you don't yell at my wife, got it?" I said it loud enough for her to hear me from the living room. Because, my friend, advertising is the soul of the business. When I returned to the living room, I saw her eyes shining. She was radiant. She knew she had a husband who stood up for her. Men, it's your responsibility to protect your wife. This is part of what love is. Love is also respect. Men, pay attention. Never call your wife fat. Never criticize her appearance. Do you think she doesn't know she's gained weight? That she's aged? Of course, she knows. Everyone knows. Even the scale knows. But no one's talking about it except you. Respect is essential in marriage. You need to learn to build up your wife, to value her. Don't joke about things that could deeply hurt her. Love is also affection. Yes, I know you're tired, but bringing affection home is your duty. Don't come home from work with your energy tank completely empty. Save a little energy for your wife. Even if you're running on fumes, give her attention. Stroke her hair, kiss her, and not just any kiss. Give her that special kiss, the kind that makes a sweet sound like a baby bird. It's not enough to just work outside the home and leave it all there. Bring the best of yourself home. Because if you don't, she might find someone who will. Yes, love has a cost. It costs to provide. It costs to protect. It costs to respect. It costs to show affection. But when you understand that this is part of love, you begin to value even more the privilege of being married. And now I ask you, are you willing to pay that price? Pleasure, affection, and boundaries. Balance in a relationship. Men, loving your wife includes bringing her pleasure. Showing affection, respect, and protection are parts of that love. Now let me tell you something. A man who truly loves is not weak. Being affectionate, protective, and respectful to your wife doesn't make you less of a man. On the contrary, it makes you a complete man. But beyond that, a real man knows how to set boundaries. Yes, you're responsible for providing, protecting, and respecting. But you also need to have authority over what's right and wrong in your home. If the clothing isn't appropriate, say something. If your children's behavior is wrong, correct it. You are the guardian of your household. Now, it's the women's turn. We've talked a lot about men, so let's focus on women. Yes, ladies, you also have a fundamental role in marriage. The Bible says that the wife should obey her husband. Now, I know that the word obey might sound strange to many women, but let's take a closer look. Obeying, in the biblical context, doesn't mean blind submission. For example, let me ask you something. If your husband is a provider, protector, affectionate, and respectful, a man who values you and brings you joy, honestly, wouldn't you be able to obey such a man? In this case, obeying doesn't mean doing everything he says. For a man, obedience means appreciation. When you value what he does, the effort he puts into providing and protecting, that's obedience. Even if he's not perfect or skilled in everything, by correcting him with wisdom and kindness, you can help him improve without undermining what he's already contributing. Men interpret respect as obedience. When you address what's wrong without diminishing his efforts, he feels valued and will continue to give his best for you and your family. Respect and appreciation in marriage. Ladies, pay attention. Respect doesn't mean agreeing with everything. If he's wrong, correct him, but do it in private. Never disrespect or embarrass your husband in public. For example, if he crossed the line, you don't need to say anything in the moment. Simply signal to him with a gesture. Dear, let's go. This already communicates that you noticed something wasn't right. Later, at home, talk to him. Love, you crossed the line, but I didn't want to expose you because I respect you and want to preserve our unity. This kind of attitude strengthens the marriage. Affection and pleasure, the keys to love in marriage. Just as a man should be affectionate, women, so should you. Real men are rare in today's world, and those who are true men need to be well cared for. Be affectionate, value him, and show admiration. For a man, affection is obedience. And about pleasure, know this. Pleasure is a fundamental part of marriage. If every time you make love it feels like a chore, something is wrong. While you're making excuses, Jezebel is offering it for free. Men need recognition, affection, and pleasure in a relationship, and the same applies to women. So, let me ask you, are you taking care of your relationship as you should? If your husband feels disrespected or unappreciated, compliments from elsewhere will start catching his attention. If her scent no longer catches your attention, it's time to reevaluate how you're nurturing your relationship. Marriage is a two-way street. Both men and women have responsibilities, and balance is the key to building a solid relationship. Now, I invite you to reflect. What are you willing to sacrifice to build a home that truly reflects God's values? Remember, every decision you make is a foundation for the future of your family. If this message spoke to your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment here. Your story could inspire others. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let's build strong, blessed families filled with God's love together. May the Lord powerfully bless your life and your home.